Good morning, children. Today I have brought you a new lesson. The lesson's name is The Address. It is from your non-detailed text snapshot. It is for class 11 CBC students. The Address, written by the Dutch author Margot Minko. It's a simple story, but it has many depths in it. We can narrate the story in a single sentence, in a single line, as the narrator woman, a girl, she comes back to her hometown after a war. She wants to get back her mother's collection of things that she had given one of her acquaintances, and she visits her house and sees those things and finally decides to leave it there itself. This is the story that this simple but many depths this story tells us. The story is written in the background of the Second World War. It is set in Holland. We know that during the Second World War, the Nazi Germany, the Nazi soldiers under the chancellorship of Adolf Hitler invaded many European countries, including Holland. And the Nazi German soldiers exterminated around 6 million European Jews. The Jewish people of Europe, all around there, were exterminated under the pretext of the Second World War. Not only that, more than 5 million other people were also executed during this Second World War in Germany and Europe. So this story is written in the background of such horrific and terrific historical background. We know that we have heard about the Holocaust that happened during the Second World War period in Germany. Adolf Hitler's anti-Semitic attitude towards the Jewish people that prompted him and his soldiers to murder these innocent people. They did it with systematic ways of human killing, like pogroms, gas chambers, mass shooting, concentration camps, gallows. Many systematic ways they used to kill these innocent people, and among them 1 million were innocent children. Those who were intellectually not fit, physically not fit, those who were POWs, prisoner of wars, those who were gypsies, those who were homosexuals, all of them were exterminated during this period. Totally around 11 million people were executed in the pretext of Second World War. So this story the address, is written in the background of such a historical incident. If we don't know the background of the story, there is no meaning in it. By reading, we can't understand what the story tells us. So, I give you this much introduction. Now let us move on to the skeleton of the story. Let us move. The story, the address, written by Margot Minko. A little bit about the author. This is Margot Minko. Margot Minko is a Dutch journalist and writer. Her real surname was Minko, but an official accidentally switched the first vowel. Switched means interchanged. Instead of E, he used I. Thus she became Margot Minko. Look at the story. The story, the address, is all about human predicament that follows the war. The story narrates how a daughter goes to her native place in Holland in search of her mother's belongings after the war. This is the central theme. This is the central line of the entire story, the address. Let us move on to the story. At the beginning of the story, it is narrated how the protagonist was given a cold reception when she went to her native place after the war in search of her mother's belongings. That was the beginning of the story. She went back to the town where she lived and from where to a woman's house to get back the belongings of her mother. After ringing the bell of house number 46 at Marconi Street, she waited for someone's answer. A woman opened the door a chink, a little bit. The door opened by a woman. Then the narrator introduced herself to the woman, but she kept on staring at her. There was no sign of recognition from the woman's side. Even after the narrator introduced herself to the woman there, she showed no sign of recognition. The woman, who is from inside the house, that is Mrs. Darling, was wearing her mother's green knitted cardigan. The narrator noticed the woman was wearing her mother's old knitted cardigan, a woolen cloth. The narrator could understand that she had made no mistake. She asked the woman whether she knew her mother. The woman could not deny this. When she recognized her mother's cardigan, she realized that the address was correct. She had no mistake. So she reached at the right place, and the woman also couldn't deny it. The narrator wanted to talk to her for some time, but the woman cautiously closed the door. But she was not ready. The narrator stopped there for some time and then left the place. She stood there for some more time, some more minutes, thinking about what could be the next step. In the subsequent section, the memories of the narrator's bygone days come to light. In a flashback, what was really happened earlier, the story tells us. Her mother had provided the address years ago during the war. She got this address from her own mother. It was during the war time. She went to her home for a few days. While the narrator came to her house for a short vacation from her studies, she could find that various things were missing. She found that so many things were not seen there. She wanted to know. At that time, her mother told her about Mrs. Darling. It was during this occasion the narrator's mother told her about Mrs. Darling. She happened to be an old acquaintance of the narrator's mother. This Mrs. Darling might have been one of the acquaintances of her mother. Lately, she had renewed contact with her and had been coming there regularly. When this war situation started and the Nazi Germans started killing the Jews, this woman came back to the narrator's mother and renewed their friendship. Every time she left their house, she took something home with her. This was the only reason she renewed her friendship with the narrator's mother. Every time she went back to her house, she took lot of valuable things from the narrator's house. Look at the conversation between Mrs. Darling and Mrs. Yes, she is the narrator's mother of the narrator. Mrs. S, you should give all your precious items to me, as you might be asked to leave any time, and you shall lose everything. Mrs. Darling, are you sure about this, as you might get in trouble for helping a Jewish family? Mrs. S, it is completely fine by me. After all, a friend in need is a friend indeed. I insist you store your belongings at my house at Marconi Street, house number 46. Thanks, Mrs. Darling, for helping me out. I could have not asked for a bigger favor. This is how Mrs. Darling convinced the narrator's mother and took away all the valuables from their house. Look at the story. She told that she wanted to save all their nice possessions. The next day, the narrator saw Mrs. Darling going out of the house with a heavy suitcase. When the narrator came back on another occasion, she saw this Mrs. Darling going away from her house carrying a heavy suitcase. She had a fleeting glimpse of Mrs. Darling's face. Fleeting glimpse here means a short scene, a transient scene of Mrs. Darling's face. She couldn't talk with her as she went away quickly. She asked her mother whether the woman lived far away. It was at this moment she asked her mother about this woman. At that time, the narrator's mother told her about the address, number 46 Marconi Street. Many days after the war, the narrator was curious to take a record of the possessions that must still be at number 46 Marconi Street. The war was over, everything was settled, but she couldn't get the courage to go back to her town and then from there to the house of Mrs. Dawlings to get back the possessions of her own mother, because her experience was so horrific and terrific. She couldn't forget those incidents. She was the only one left after the war in her family. With this intention, she went to the given address. The concluding part of the story describes the second visit of the narrator. As the narrator's first visit yielded no result, so she planned to go once again. Interestingly, a girl of 15 opened the door to her. Her mother was not at home. So the second part of the story tells us about the narrator's second visit to the same address, house number 46 at Marconi Street. When she visited the second time there, Mrs. Dawling was not there. Her daughter, a 15-year-old girl, welcomed the narrator to the house. The narrator expressed her wish to wait for her. The girl accompanied her to the passage. The narrator saw an old-fashioned iron candle holder hanging next to a mirror that was once hers. The girl made her sit in the living room and went inside. So the little girl made her sit in the living room and went for preparing a tea. The narrator was horrified to find herself in a room with articles familiar to her, but she could not claim. She found herself in the midst of familiar things which she longed to see again, but which troubled her in this strange atmosphere. She had no courage to look around her. She was completely dejected, seeing the things kept there in an artless way. Look at that. The daughter sees her mother's belongings. The narrator found herself in the midst of things. Once they belonged to her mother. She wanted to see them again. All those things were taken away by Mrs. Dawling and kept here in her house. She was pained to note that they were arranged tastelessly. The ugly furniture and the muggy smell upset her. The girl brought tea for her. Meanwhile, she took a glass of tea for the narrator. Then she opened a box and took some spoons out of it. The narrator also looked at the antique plates. She knew that all the cutlery, knives, forks and spoons were of silver. Her mother had told her about them when she was alive. So all those things kept in the room, kept in the house, were once the belongings of the narrator or the narrator's mother. Now they belonged to this house. She wanted to get them back, but she no longer had the desire to possess them. She thought that those things had lost their value, their fragrance, their importance once her mother gone. And those were kept in an untidy, an artless way, a tasteless way in the house. So she did not want to get them back. She got up, walked to the door, and left the room. She resolved to forget the address and moved on. Finally, she decided to forget the address forever, and she went away from the address. So children, this outline of the story will help you to understand the story when you read the text and when you attend the class. So consider this as an additional material other than what you get from your classroom. So after listening to this outline story, you read the text once again and make it understand very clearly. Goodbye.